online is definitely increased. Generally, our vacancy has not changed that much over 2 years. That's mainly because we have not had the additional supply, and the same points that Pat was bringing out. The rates have stayed pretty consistent. We manage a lot of property, and in most commercial leases, there's going to be a provision that the lease increases by a certain amount every year, 3%, CPI, whatever it might be, or negotiated. We've seen those of our landlords sort of shut their eyes on that one and freeze it because we've got good tenants that struggled through this tough market and they wanted to keep them. We want to keep the good tenants. You're seeing also more mom and pops coming up. Maybe these are folks that are in retirement or were forced out of the corporate world and have always dreamed of having a pizza shop. So you're seeing that kind of thing come up a lot more. Now let's talk rent concessions. Years ago, if I was going to go into a retail center, I might get $25, $35 a square foot from the landlord to build, not the pizza oven, but some walls and some nice things in there. You cannot get that now. There's just not upfit money coming from the landlords. A lot of it has to do with the banks. It's just not there. So if you've got a shell space, then typically what you have to negotiate is for your tenant to go in there and they spend their money to upfit the walls and move on from there. And typically what the retailer will do is give the tenant free rent. If the tenant is not going to sign a lease for longer than 5 years and the landlord had the money, you can't, as we call it, burn it out. So we're seeing more short-term leases. That's a little more confident than we had a couple of years ago where we could probably not get somebody to even sign over a year. But I think the landlords also would rather keep those rates consistent so that you don't have one tenant that's at $10 a square foot and one that's at $16. That way they keep their center full. You don't have the dark spaces. Any kind of activity in the center is always going to look better. Also, tenants talk to each other. So just as soon as you hammer out a hard deal on somebody at 14, what? This guy's at 10. So you've got to know that they're going to talk. And at the end of the day, if the landlord gets an improved piece of property that the tenant paid for and it's off the market. We had one scenario in my office where a commercial developer told one of my associates if he brought a lease with a 17-month free rent provision, they would look at it. And that's the biggest I've ever heard. But it's a really, we have to just get creative. In 2012, we're still going to have that same problem. The tenants aren't going to want as long a term on their leases as we would hope for. But the big thing to keep in mind as well is on these retail centers, you've got a pair of lender eyes looking at it. So the lenders do not want to see a low rate or a lot of free rent. Sometimes you've got to be very careful that what you're doing and putting that tenant in is creative, but yet it still protects the asset. In terms of rate changing for the retail sector, I don't really see them changing a lot. They've stabilized. We might see a little modest growth rent because of, again, that supply and demand, that they're not building new centers. We could be out of the woods, just not sure yet. If you'll flip the next one.